Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Infoblox Reporting Tech Demo Series, Visibility Requirements for Hybrid Networking and Security. My name is Bob Rose. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Infoblox DDI, located in our Tacoma, Washington office, although working from home, of course. And I'll be moderating our discussion today. And with me is Bob Hansmann, our Senior Product Marketing Manager for Security, located in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Art Vacca, one of Infoblox's leading senior system engineers located in Kirkland, Washington. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, Bob.
So before we get to the good stuff, I'd like to mention just a few housekeeping items today. We are recording today's event. We'll publish it on the Infoblox YouTube channel, and we'll be sending out a link so you can view it again, or perhaps send it on to a colleague that wasn't able to make the call today. Also, if you have questions, please enter them through the Q&A window in the bottom of the Zoom console. We'll try to answer those questions in real time, but we will also aim to make time at the end for some Q&A. And also, we have a couple of polling questions for you today, and these are really important so we can get your feedback and better tailor the content to your interests. And then finally, we'll be sending you a copy of the sample report guide, the reporting analytics deployment guide, and some other assets around BloxOne Threat Defense and security. And so it should be coming to you in the next day or so. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be talking to you about DDI as a security foundation. We'll be looking at on-premise security, visibility, and reporting, and then we'll be shifting gears and looking at the cloud managed side, visibility virtually at every stage. And then we'll do some wrap up and we'll have some Q&A. As we get started here, hybrid technologies really drive network transformation. And one of the things that we've been hearing from our customers and we've been seeing across the environment is, of course, everyone's getting direct access to cloud apps from everywhere. We've seen this even more with, COVID-19, and really enterprise has become the new network. Gentlemen, any feedback on that? Any visibility that you have as you are engaging with customers as we look at this transformation in the environment?
Now, only the comment that those who were already doing it seem to be having less of a challenge, in the current situation, because they were already leveraging the cloud. Moving people to remote locations became a lot easier. The real challenge is getting back to the main office, the main network.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Bob. Another thing that we're seeing is software-defined networks are really enabling the edge. We are seeing a lot more policy-driven networks. We're seeing, network functions being virtualized, and this is true all the way to the branch office.
And Bob, I also see in the service provider vertical that services are being pushed out towards the cell site, so directly accessing the consumer end device. So we see a lot of services moving out to the edge.
Yeah, that exactly is true, and that's happening more and more. Gentlemen, another thing that we're seeing is bring your own device mobility. I worked for a service provider for 5 years, and we just saw an increase in BYOD mobility, and of course IoT is really expanding exponentially, which is really posing some scalability and security challenges for a lot of companies.
Oh, definitely. Matter of fact, right now, again, with a lot of people working from home, a lot of people don't, particularly in enterprise, didn't really pay that much attention over the last couple of years as over and over home routers and a lot of other home devices were becoming compromised so that people could monitor traffic and maybe even use them for denial of service attacks. So now that we have so many more people working remotely, really understanding BYOD and IoT, yeah, we still need to worry about the thermostat and things like that, but let's just get to the basics and make sure that we at least are securing ourselves from the potential threats that these devices come, even if we can't control it, because it's like an employee's personal device, we can put in some protections there.
Well, and one of the big challenges is a lot of the devices now don't have a lot of robustness to be able to put a security stack on that device, right?
Yep.
So it really creates a new, and broader threat vector to deal with. But the good news is that Infoblox is focused in DNS, DHCP, and IPAM, which really delivers precise network visibility. We're going to show you that today, of course, working with authoritative IPAM. We're going to talk a little bit about what that actually means, and then being able to secure your environments and get forensic data, especially to help your SecOps team. So really important stuff, but we have tools, and that's the good news. We have tools available that help you deal with these hybrid technologies and deal with the security threats that are coming across these environments. So let's look quickly at DDI. DDI is DNS, DHCP, IPAM. And really from the security architecture perspective, because Infoblox is founded really on DNS, DHCP, IPAM, these are the foundations, right? Because it gives us the ability to get to the lowest common denominator. DNS, of course, is the foundation of every network conversation. DHCP addresses network access, and IPAM database, especially if you're able to make it authoritative, the authoritative source of all your network connected assets, it gives you a huge advantage. What other thoughts, Bob, do you have on this one?
For me, just for those out in the audience who don't know me, and I know I'm so well known, you all should know me, but for the few that don't, I've been doing this for 30 years in security. And one of the things that I was excited about joining Infoblox is because of its DDI aspect. There are so many security solutions out there, and yet there are so many ways for them to be evaded. And you can't evade a DNS request. You want to connect to a command and control server. You want to connect to a specific location to steal data, to get more malware, whatever. The DNS request is going to be visible. And that's where this is really cool, is that it's not necessarily a replacement for everything else out there, but it is a tremendous complement for when those really advanced attacks are going to somehow evade your current defenses, or the attack may actually be over DNS, which those other things don't even look at. So it's both a foundation in my mind, as well as a standalone solution to plug a gap.
Well, that's a really good point. I think one thing too is that DDI gives you inside out security, right? Because it protects an endpoint on your cloud deployment, but all the way to everything in between. So in essence, you become your own resolver, and I think that's a real advantage. Well, we talked about just a moment ago authoritative IPAM, and let's dig into that and really describe what we're talking about here. What you have on your network, whether you have a Microsoft environment or just across your broad network, is a variety of different endpoints. They're constantly coming on and coming off the network. And there's all sorts of data, as you can see here, that we capture. And the key is the ability to discover that all of that data, all of that rich data that already exists on your network into a centralized IP address management database that's really a single control plane for seeing all of this data. And there's all sorts of things that happen on the network moment by moment. Art, maybe you could talk to a couple of these things.
One of the issues that I ran into in my last role was that keeping track of network changes was always kind of a moving target. So with automated discovery and you're polling your network infrastructure, that gave you a what's changed list that you could then update and make sure that you understand why the change was made. And it gives you an accurate IPAM view without having to go through and completely audit your entire IP inventory. And I found that after adding to authoritative IPAM, I was managing my resources versus doing discovery and running fire, putting out fires everywhere. So that was a pivotal moment for me.
Yeah, a really good point. And I think another thing is that Infoblox actually has the tools, whether you're on premise or in the cloud environment, to pull all of this information together to get you really to a single source of truth. And I think this is the thing that really sets Infoblox apart, because we're able to get to that data and help you see that data when it's being automatically discovered, whether on-prem or in the hybrid cloud. And the advantage is that Infoblox really is platform agnostic. It really doesn't matter what platform you're on-prem, private, public, hybrid, multi-cloud, doesn't matter. We're able to discover all of this great information. And so from the standpoint, let's look a little bit, now that we know a little bit about authoritative IPAM and capturing all of that data in virtually near real time. Where do we get the data from, especially from a reporting standpoint? Well, it comes across DNS, DHCP, IPAM, and security. And let's unpack this a little bit. Art, what insights do you have to share with us on this one?
So the image we're looking at here is our home dashboard in the reporting appliance. And this is where we summarize all of the streaming syslog data that we receive from all of our members. And it has a variety of graphs and charts that will summarize what's going on in the grid. And it's a good launching point to go into a deeper dive in individual services, or look at current alerts that are happening, and it gives you a good overview of your infrastructure.
Well, and Bob, there's also some security data that's pulled in here as well.
Well, yeah, but you know, as I've been talking about quite a bit internally, I personally am realizing my own bias to tend to think of things as, well, this is security information. And yet, if I have a security incident, nothing helps me solve that more than if I have the DNS information. There's so much rich data available at the DNS layer that can help me not just identify if this is a security event, but what other devices may be impacted. Did this come laterally across the network, or was this the initial point of infection? Microsoft information integrated into it, you know, including like Active Directory information. So I'm not referring to an IP address, I'm referring to a user and a specific device. There's just all of this information really is security information. But of course, we're talking, the TI there is the threat intelligence, is the really unique security specific value that we're also feeding into that chart. How does all this other data correlate with what we know of other threat activity?
Well, exactly, and we're pulling in this information, VMware, for example, virtual discovery, layer 2, layer 3, all the endpoints, all the switches and routers, all this data, right, is being pulled in, and it gives you such value in terms of the visibility that you have. Visibility is key. If you can't see it, you cannot manage it, and that's one of the key value points as we look at Infoblox. So let's take a look at some of the key business initiatives over a timeline, because obviously we need access to data, things that have happened in the past, things that are happening now, things that are happening in the future. Audit and compliance is a good example. How easy is it to track and report on what's happened over time? What happens now if your apps are down, or if you have performance impacts? Is something going on in DDI that's impacting your availability and performance? Really important to know. What about threats? There could be a DNS issue happening, and we need to make sure that we need to be able to see what's going on in the real time. And then, of course, looking to the future. When will current capacity not meet future requirements? And specifically on the security side, right, Bob, there's security response and planning, and how do you really cut down the amount of time it takes to investigate and respond?
Yeah, the two blue boxes have been the biggest challenge for the last decade. Various companies may feel they've got a good control over one or the other, but they never feel like they've done enough. You know, those are long-term challenges.
Well, that kind of sets the stage as we look across a timeline for, you know, important data that a lot of companies are focused on. What we'd like to do now is kind of turn it back to you, and we're going to offer our first polling question. And this polling question will pop up in your screen. If it's not showing, it might be hiding behind something. But the question is, what's the most difficult security challenge you face today? Maybe you're trying to protect data. Maybe you're trying to contain threats, keep applications up and performing or recovering after an attack. If you've been through an attack, that's obviously can be a heavy lift. And of course, getting full visibility and awareness across those vulnerabilities. Go ahead and take a few moments now. I'll leave the poll open, and we really appreciate, thank you everyone for those that have already voted. It's really interesting to see your feedback. So thank you for sharing that. And we'll leave the poll open for just a couple of more seconds. If you haven't voted, go ahead.
This is great information. It helps us identify that some of the things we've got prepared to talk about, it'll help us guide where we emphasize the information that we want to provide here today based on what you're really interested in.
Exactly. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. So thank you. I'm going to share out the results. Guys, boy, interesting. Full visibility and awareness of network vulnerabilities, number 1. Almost 60% of those that responded. And then almost evenly split, in fact, about keeping apps up and protecting data. So thank you everyone for sharing. We really appreciate that. Well, what I'd like to do now is go into a little more detail and help you see from the high level summary view down to the granular view, how you can use data that's already on your network. And what we're looking at here, we talked about the ability to see this data, and access logging is a really key area. One use case would be, for example, what clients do you have on your network right now that's querying Facebook? And so this is an advantage because you can really see using query logging who's queried what was queried by whom, and it really gives you fast, easy visibility into who's doing what. Really important use case. Art, any insights on this one?
Well, you're bringing up a dashboard that has a user input section on top, and this is all definable. So you can customize this report to include other searchable fields that's within this index. So when I get to the live demo, I can show you more on that. But having the ability to tailor the network and do a domain search is so convenient, and obviously the time range.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Another one that's helpful is, we've all been, in the context of an audit, somebody comes up and say, hey, I need to see this data, and now you're fumbling through spreadsheets and trying to access records and so on. How much better would it be if you could just, in a few clicks, pull data up? And specifically in this use case, what is a specific client queried? Maybe you need to look back and see what had happened 6 months or a year ago. This gives you on-demand insight for audit, easily accessible records of device requests for domains, and of course the ability, especially to deal with large data sets and collect and parse and visualize data and use these reports. Art, any insights on this one?
Again, it's really nice to be able to publish this report. Someone comes and asks you what's the IP activity for this address, you can generate the report, export the data, and you've completed the task.
Yeah, it's so helpful, so convenient. Another area is, as we get to more granular visibility, maybe you wanted to see something on a per half-hour basis, pinpoint some activity that's going on, maybe see data as needed from a summarized view, and you want to look at it at time stamp basis. So maybe there's automation without a significant amount of resource hits on your CPU that you're concerned with. So this is really important, but what happens if you need to drill down even deeper into maybe a per minute basis? What kinds of things do you see on this one, Art?
as you change your time resolution, you get more granularity in your data accuracy. So this report here, you've got a finer level of reporting with regards to the type of records that are being displayed. You can also set triggers based on max and minimum events for this data, and it gives you higher resolution visibility.
Well, one example would be, let's look here at 4 a.m. I know it's a little tiny to see, but you have these spikes, right? You have a number of spikes. Were you expecting a spike at 4 a.m.? There are several others here that you could actually look at and drill down into. And the key advantage here, of course, is with the query logging, it does reduce your overhead, and it does give you the ability with the compression algorithms to reduce that indexing by up to 30%. So, if you need to really get into this data from a forensic investigation perspective, this is a great way to do it. And of course, we have lots of reports that start right out of the box, but this gives you the ability to really get into the granular visibility. There's another one as well. We were just talking about security forensics. What if you had a system that was compromised last week? What other systems did it communicate with? This is a really important one too, isn't it, Art?
Yes. So being able to set a time frame, start and stop, and getting all of that historical data. If it's a DHCP assigned address, what address did this person have? And then track, did they get a different IP address assignment? So all of this data is archived and it's available.
Exactly right. Well, we've had a question. Timur has asked, can you tell us the DDI configurations of Infoblox? Anyone want to take that question?
So yes, I can take that. Infoblox is a platform that provides services. So we could talk about DNS, DHCP, our IPAM service. We have our threat analytics processes. We have NTP running within the grid. So we have a lot of services that run. And if we have time, maybe in the Q&A section, I can go through the master grid member page, and I can show you the matrix of members versus services, and briefly discuss, how the grid's set up and how data communication happens between the centralized database and the grid members that are providing those services.
Very good, thank you. Appreciate that, Art. And then another question, the role of the grid. We're going to talk about that as well here in just a moment. Do you want to address that one quickly?
I'm actually typing an answer back, but what was the question again?
Yeah, what's the role of the grid?
Oh, the grid master is the centralized database, and all of our metadata gets stored there. And then each member that provides the service will maintain a local copy of that data to provide service availability, and then update the grid master as that data changes. And we have a lot of services that then are orchestrated off the grid master that will be pushed then out to the grid members, and that's done over a secure data channel.
Great response. Let's look now at some of the pre-built reports. A lot of folks have to spin up a report. You have to talk to the folks that will be using the report. You have to make a big project. It can be a real pain. And then, of course, getting people to actually build the reports. So we have pre-built reports. This is an integrated data collection engine with Splunk. Splunk is one of the most powerful visualization reporting tools in the market right now. And so we have a direct integration to our DDI platforms. So you have access to data that no one else can get. We've talked about DDI, DNS, DHCP, IPAM. You get access to reports based on that. In addition, we have a centralized data archival tool, and the advantage of this, of course, is that we use that grid technology Art was just talking about. That provides really the most comprehensive data collection with minimal indexing. So Infoblox Reporting Analytics actually uses less indexing, which means less cost than Splunk itself because of our compression algorithms. And then, of course, you know, our engineers have validated the data, and so they've been able to determine some of the most important reports to get. And of course, we live and breathe DDI, so we've done a lot of this pre-work for you. We have unique algorithms and predictive reports, and there's actually over 100 pre-built dashboards and reports. We're going to be sending out to you the sample report guide to give you some idea of what you get with Infoblox Reporting Analytics. And you'll be able to take a look. We're going to just take a moment here and show you some of the topics that are in that sample report guide. There's predictive dashboards reports, there's device, DHCP, DNS, internal, IPAM dashboards, DTC, which is our global server load balancer. We have system appliance dashboards, audit, cloud, and there's many more. Today, though, we're going to focus on ecosystem and specifically security dashboards. And so what we'd like to do now is just take a look at pulling back the covers a little bit, and I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to have Art go ahead and show you what the reporting analytics user experience looks like.
Thank you, Bob. So this is the default home landing page for the reporting service. And if you look here in the gray toolbar, you'll notice that we have the home dashboard. To the right, the dashboard library. There's a report library. We have some quick filterings. We have alerts and search. Those are the main features that I use on a daily basis. So I can look at my entire grid and see kind of the health and status here. And we can customize all of this, and I'll walk through that once we get into our first dashboard. So let's say I want to look at NX domains. I have a new ticket and I would like to see what's going on with our network. So I can run into dashboards, and we have 2 pages of provided reports, and they cover all of our services. And we can go in here and look at top NX domains. And currently I'm just going to run with the default time of 1 day. And we'll see that we can go through all of our index data and narrow that down to the top NX domain results. If we wanted to look through a different time frame, we can drop down. We can do real time, relative, specific date time ranges. And we have a multitude of, you know, number of talkers, DNS members, DNS views, type of issue. So we can look in this report for NXDOMAIN and NOERROR, different charting abilities. And if you wanted to maybe customize this report, you could drop over to the edit section in the top right, and you can edit the panel, which allows you to rearrange the panel elements, maybe change this to a pie chart, or you know, update titles and placement. If you don't want to do that and you want to change the source of your query, you can go into the dashboard XML source. A lot of these are referenced to outboard reports, but this is a sample of some of the queries that are possible. And this is all standard Splunk nomenclature. So if you have that expertise in-house, this is will be a consistent experience. And Bob, if you want to transition back to some of our pre-captured reports.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look. Let's see here. Here we go. So Art just showed you the top NXDOMAIN and NOERROR report. And again, the key value of this one is, you know, you have a client infected with malware that's using domain generation algorithm. And the big problem, of course, with that is that it causes a large amount of NXDOMAIN activity to fill up your cache and reduce your DNS server response time to legitimate queries. That is a huge problem. We see that all the time. That is such a big problem. And so this report really helps to address that. Another key use case, and obviously Art just gave you kind of a look under the covers there, but we're sending this presentation out to you so you can see it. It will be in a PDF format so you can see some of these reports that we talk about today. This next one is threat protection by top rules by source. So maybe you have a security admin that knows that a client's infected and you want to drill deeper into the malware forensics. So this report gives you the malware attack methodologies and the frequencies. And Bob Hansmann's actually going to talk about that. This is all on-prem right now, what we're talking about. Bob's going to talk about that from a cloud perspective in just a moment. Another key report that we have is top malware and DNS tunneling by client. So tunneling is a huge issue, and security teams are always looking for bad actors. And this report combines malicious DNS queries and exfiltration activity to give you an overall view of malicious activity going on the network. So this is another really important one, looking for malware and DNS tunneling. And so you'll be able to see this as well in the sample report guide. When we are talking about tunneling, so tunneling is really a huge issue here. You know, and Art, maybe you can speak to some of this too, but there are some applications like Spotify or Sophos antivirus that do use tunneling. So how do you determine exfiltration activity in the environment and be able to really distinguish between the malicious stuff and the stuff that's legitimate, right? This is a really important one.
Our cloud-based threat insight platform runs a very comprehensive AI tool that can characterize even slow flow DNS tunneling and accurately categorize that, whether it be legitimate command and control for antivirus, or if it's a compromised host establishing its command and control. So we have a on-prem and cloud-based solution that can provide visibility into that.
Exactly right. That's a really good point. Another one that we have is tunneling activity, DNS tunneling activity. And so you might have a security team that's looking for clients attempting to exfiltrate data. And so if you looked at this report, for example, and again, you have the graphic display as well as you have the table display. And here's your bad actor right here. So this report helps you identify clients that attempt DNS tunneling, and you can go in and look at this on a time basis as well. Right, Art?
Yes. I was actually looking at a Q&A question. So the tunneling activity gives you the insight into the activity on your network. So it gives you the ability to properly triage threats and assign resources to those.
Exactly. And then, of course, we have another one, the malicious activity by client. This is a really popular one too, because if you have to determine, details around a device that was compromised last month, you need to know what malicious activities have been associated with it. And so you can actually drill into the IP address, and then you can go in and take a look at the domains specifically that client has been actively involved in. And so this is really important as far as identifying malicious activities over a time frame and clients that you need to take action on to prevent those activities. So really important report here. Any comments on this one, Art?
It's nice that you have this report and the data available to then reference our Dossier lookup tool or any of our threat insight research tools that we have in the cloud portal to pivot on this data and see what other additional risks are exposed on your network. So, you know, one of these URLs might lead you to a name server that's hosting 20 other attacking sites. So being able to pivot on this data gives you more insight into the traffic that's flowing across your network.
Exactly. And then, of course, one of the most requested reports is this DNS Top RPZ Hits report. So if you're a security admin, you need to identify all the clients that are hitting a known malicious domain, or maybe all of the malicious domains that a known infected client actually is hitting. So this is really an important report. This is one of the ones that are most requested from our customers. So obviously there's a lot more reports that we could cover. We don't really have the scope in this call to do that, but the sample report guide will give you some insight. You can see the dashboards and so on. What we'd like to do now is turn this over to our second polling question. And that second polling question is on your screen right now. And it's which security capability currently suffers most from insufficient visibility in your organization. Maybe it's security planning, threat detection, alert investigation, incident response, or threat hunting. Which of these resonates with you most?
This was a great little follow-up to the first one. We didn't even plan it, but since everybody chose visibility as their, 60% of them chose visibility as their biggest concern. So what do you need that visibility for is really what we're talking about here.
Exactly. Thank you, everyone, for responding. It's interesting race here. Go ahead and take a moment and pick which one is most important to your organization. And I will close the poll in just a second. Last chance.
It was interesting to watch it over time because the first people to respond real quick were all in one particular category, but now people that have thought about it longer have come out with a different response. So it's kind of interesting to watch all of this over time.
That's right. All right. Go ahead, last second. Okay, there we go. We're going to share out the results. So threat detection, Bob, not surprising, right?
Yeah, detection and incident response tend to be the first two things. I have consulted privately before I came to Infoblox. I've done consulting for a few years, and I had companies who had products that were all about incident response, but when they surveyed people, they wanted better detection. Then, it was like all the hype, when you went to a show like RSA, everybody's talking about one particular thing, but in the end, people still want better detection. You can talk about how blocking and preventing threats, we got to do it, but I'm really interested in, no, you're still really interested in threat detection. These other things are your next level of security. But it's also pretty well balanced out. It's interesting to see that it's well scattered, really. I mean, even though there's a spike around threat detection, these are all problems and challenges that we have to deal with. And luckily, what we're going to be talking about today on the cloud side, I'll emphasize these key points.
Well, speaking of the cloud side, nice segue there, Bob. Let's talk now about cloud managed visibility. Everything up to this point, we've been talking about on-prem, but Infoblox is really giving you a stronger DDI today, but also enabling your cloud also for today, but for the future as well.
Correct. And do want to emphasize that the on-prem portion, while it was talking about the reporting available with our on-prem solutions, some of the data still comes from your remote and mobile workers. So it's not that the data is only on-prem. So I did want to make that clarification that we do correlate all this data from all your users everywhere, all your branch offices, everything. You do have that kind of visibility. But for those who want everything on-prem, the reporting there has certain capabilities, which you just saw. And for those who are interested in perhaps just doing everything in the cloud, I'm going to kind of overview what that does. And what I'm going to use as a framework for this presentation is the Gartner Adaptive Security Architecture. Now there's NIST and there's all these frameworks and zero trust and MITRE and all of that. We're simply going to break everything down to capabilities to give you visibility about what has happened to help you plan and predict what you're going to have to be prepared for. This is for your continuous improvement efforts. Then we're going to talk about the prevention portion, which in Gartner parlance means detection, detecting threats and keeping them or preventing them from getting in. Then we'll talk about detecting active threats on your network. So this would be alert, investigation, and then there's the response side okay, we've detected it. Do we have enough information to know what to do next so that we can respond to it in a timely way? So let's get right into that. The first thing I'm going to talk about, though, is just to get this out of the way is, I imagine everybody here on the call, something about security or you wouldn't be here, but we often have to communicate this stuff to other people. And so one of the first things we built into this was some very high level reports. Of course, this was all, demand from our install base. And they said, look, I just need some high level data facts to share with executives. So we have a roll-up summary that gives you big numbers of, okay, so how much activity did we see in DNS? How many of those were security related? And how many of them actually turned into real incidents? And some other key data. But we also have a specific drill down on things like data exfiltration. Now we're talking not DLP. This is DNS exfiltration over DNS, something that we've seen an increased amount over the last couple of years. If they're smashing and grabbing 6 gigabytes or terabytes of data, then they're probably going to use another channel. But before they get to that, typically, they're trying to get in and steal a few key passwords for a few key systems. And to sneak that out, they are more often using DNS because DLP doesn't watch DNS. There's also just malicious DNS activity. There's activity that we know that DNS call cannot possibly be legitimate. Some of it's known and some of it's just suspicious based on behavior we'll talk about in a moment. And then the fourth and final area here is that we can break down, and there's a lot more reports, but the one I wanted to highlight here is that sometimes you need to know what kinds of attacks are going on. Again, this is because, in my mind, a lot of it's because of the press. Nothing's worse than an executive who's recently been on a plane and read a magazine that said, ooh, you got to worry about APTs. And this is a great report for explaining to them, yes, look how much APT activity we're seeing here, but also look that we're also seeing a lot of activity around malicious name servers or data exfiltration. You can kind of help put some of your top threats in perspective in a visual way. And finally, on this slide, I did want to highlight that this can be reported over various reporting periods. So, it's got very flexible reporting capabilities. And we'll go on to the next slide here, where for the security people, yeah, they like to use dashboards and stuff like that, but sometimes knowing where you're going to drill into the UI can be aided by simply having a top 10 visibility. Now, there's also a dashboard that shows most of these reports. You can rearrange it and show which ones, so you don't have to print these out. But you can look at just what kind of DNS activity, device activity, web activity. Is it spiking? Is it abnormal in some area? Kind of give you an idea where to even start as you just get your cup of coffee in the morning. There's also very specific threat risk trend detail. Not just the threats, but I like attacker statistics. It can actually tell you the attackers that may be focusing on you. Which is great for not just detecting now, but knowing that, oh, crud, we might want to look into them, learn a little bit more about them. What kind of tactics do they use? Maybe we need to crank up our sensitivity on certain tools. There's a lot of predictive information here. And then, of course, how your threat intelligence is being used. And again, as before, these can also be produced over various periods of time so that you can compare activity. So this is everything available to help you predict what's going to happen next. But as far as detecting or preventing current attacks, let's look at our key technologies there. Now, reputation and signatures, these have been around for a while. This is still the best way. I remember because I was in antivirus back in the 90s, and everybody said signatures don't work because we had polymorphic viruses come out, so we had to come up with something different. And if you use the word signature to describe your product, everybody says, oh, it must be crap. Well, the fact of the matter is they still use signature, and everybody uses signatures because it is the fastest, most efficient way to identify A, known threats, and B, known whitelisting stuff that the file you just downloaded is just the update to Microsoft Word. So they use signatures because it's very efficient. And we use that as well everywhere. But there's also reputation information to help you with some of the more shady type of information and indicators. And again, these could be location related, that, you know, things from this site are suspicious and so forth. But there's also a lot of file reputation information, actually pioneered by Trend Micro about 15 years ago. So reputation affects a lot of different indicators of compromise. But the behavior on the right side, this is where, and we're just going to call it machine learning. We're not going to hype it and say it's AI, because almost every single instance of AI I've seen today in use by any antivirus, web security, email security, phishing, IPS, it doesn't matter. All the security solutions, they talk about AI, and it's just really good machine learning. That's all it really is. Well, we aren't quite there with the AI side yet. But these are the technologies that we're using to identify any kind of threat activity, everything from a fast flux to that DNS packet going out, that request. Does it look a little odd that maybe it's got part of a password that it's just been stolen, kind of pegged onto the end of it? Those are the little things that behavioral analysis is allowing us to detect to stop an actual breach from taking place. So next on our list is, as we move from the current to detection. Now I call this investigation and response because, yeah, Gartner breaks it into two very basic, you know, like it's black and white. Well, it's not. Typically what you get is an alert. And then the analyst has to go dig in and look into it. Mostly we're using SIMs. Some of it may be automated. But in the end, you know, they got to dig through data. And here I've pointed them just to SIM, like that's the only place they have to go. The average security researcher ends up looking at anywhere from 6 to 12 different sources when they get something that's really complicated. Yeah, there's some black and white ones. You look at 1 or 2 places and you got it. But they do have to look at a lot of places, and SIM, that's the value of SIM. It puts it all in one place for them. So far, so good. The thing around this manual investigation is that it takes time. And again, you guys are going to get these slides, so I'm not going to waste your time reading the stuff that I figure most of it you already, it's obvious, you know it, but you'll get these slides in a PDF later, and those are just some notes for your reference later. But here's how we've changed it. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to take a look at what we've done is, because of all that DDI stuff that the other Bob was talking about earlier, we've enriched all of that data. There was actually a question that came through about, you know, hold it, this looks like you guys are just using Splunk reporting, so what do you do? It is the data. That's what we do. We have all that DNS visibility, DHCP, and IP address management information. The IP address management information, we even went beyond that. They talked about discovery, but again, we only have an hour here, right? So we're very limited on how much we can show you. The discovery stuff is one of the 2 or 3 things that got me most excited during my interview process. I've only been here about 6 months, and I really debated whether to even come here, because I'm going, hey, I've been in security for 32 years. I've actually been an architect and designed several of the, you know, internet update processes and things like that, that I've just, you know, what does this got to do with security? It's nice to know kind of stuff. But as I got into it, and I've been in security response, focused on that for the last decade, I'm going, wow, this is the information I always wanted at my fingertips when I was trying to dig into a problem. So this tremendous amount of data is enriched, allows me in one place to just get rid of most of it, because that IP incident is now a security alert with all the information I need. And then we also, of course, have automation capabilities that a lot of those alerts, because of the enriched data, we can make automatic decisions. You guys mentioned, you know, vulnerabilities being a concern. One of the things we can do is, based on an incident, you set up a policy and we can trigger automatically to have a vulnerability scanner take place. We can trigger a policy to have that person isolated to a virtual segment of the network. There are so many things that we can trigger and do it without, you know, the risk of accidentally messing up somebody in an important situation, because we have the data to make a true definitive decision automatically. So we automate a lot of it, as well as provide that information for the analyst. So let me show you some of the data that we have available here. Let's see, next slide here. Yeah, so here, this would be an example of the kind of stuff that you could pull up. Now, Dossier is a solution that's just part of our basic product, okay? But it is, we talk about it internally like it's a solution in and of itself because it originally was. But it's so important for when you're trying to make a quick decision about, is this something I need to worry about? Is it something we need to respond to? Number one, that little categorization box I've circled here, this would list every source of threat intelligence that agreed this thing was bad, or at least worthy of investigation. So this list can go on, and again, we're not going to have the time to go into it. We get threat sources from a dozen different places. That threat intelligence, and I'm going to make a little plug for that real quick because I think it's important, is that that data from all those sources then tells you that we found it in how many locations, how many URLs were affected, how many subdomains were involved, you know, was it a complex attack? There's a lot of things here, and you see the little warning flags. So much information, and all this stuff is hyperlinked, so you can drill into it more. Matter of fact, let's go to the next slide here. And yeah, so it accelerates those linkages. Let's go to the next slide. And here, I've actually just looked at my dashboard of all the threats that have come up overnight. But if I click on the policies at the top, it pulls down a list, and I can say, I just want to know the ones about this policy. Why might I pick a particular policy? Maybe because we've seen a lot of activity like that in the last few days. We're seeing that kind of attack. I want to dig into that first before I get in everything else. Or maybe if I click on threat class, I'll get in the information, and I can say, you know, that was basically a fast flux, or it was a data exfiltration, or maybe bot. I'm just, you know, we've seen a lot of bot net type activity. We want to really watch that. So that's the first thing I check every morning. Again, you filter it. And there's properties that I can click on, and a whole lot more here where I can, again, really focus this down. But when I'm done, and I've set all my filters, then I can take a look and say, you know, there's this one thing that it's high confidence, low threat. Now you might say, well, that's probably not the first one I'm going to look at, but maybe because of a variety of things, you know, hey, I think I've seen that, that domain before. So I can click on it now. Let's go in and look at that information. So I click on that, and I drill into the next report, which tells me specifically which threat intelligence source identified it again. So this is, again, very useful. Serval is very powerful. It has some strengths and it has some weaknesses. Every threat intelligence source has its strengths and weaknesses. That's why we have so many. You want them together. Knowing that right up front tells me what I can trust and what I might want to have to validate before I start, you know, setting up a flare. So I now know that. I go into it, and I can see, again, more information about this record has more DNS activity. There are 4 different hits on this particular IP address. I can look into it some more. The categorization over here. If I click on the categorization, I can see that. I can see who is information about that location. It was a newly observed domain. When was it created? You know, wow, it's only 2 days old, 3 days old. The registrar, they themselves aren't bad, but I also know that they, you know, actually let other people use their network. So there's something on their network that may have caused a threat. All of this kind of data I can get at real quick to, again, help me make a decision about the threat. And so the last thing I did want to throw at you here was a freebie. Now, this is something you'll be able to get for free. We're going to send you the follow-up. I mentioned you'll get the slides as a PDF. But we have a public resource for our threat reports. Now, when other companies do threat reports, it's like their annual one or their quarterly or whatever. We produce threat reports several times a month and several times a week on specific threats. This one here, I particularly like it because it came out in December. So it's not, you know, this is an ancient news. But DNS over HTTPS, or DOE, is a new technology that the browser companies were starting to roll out. And in fact, Firefox now rolls it out as a way to allow their browser to disguise DNS queries. That makes all of this stuff we're talking about invalid. We don't have the DNS visibility to be able to do our threat intelligence or our threat research or our threat hunting, investigations. All of that is really hampered if we don't have that DNS visibility. And here the browser companies are going to be introducing a technology that really cripples our capabilities. In fact, in December, this SciEx bot came out and added that capability so they could steal data over DNS and they could encrypt it so that even solutions like ours wouldn't be able to see it. Now we actually have put in something there that we detect DNS over HTTPS and we just block it. On an enterprise network, there's no excuse for that. So we can control that. But I wanted to show you the report. Notice how it's broken on. This is the impact on the customer. Here's a summary of the campaign and where it's hosted. There's information about the attack chain as it starts on page 1, rolls to page 2. You can see the chain of events and how it goes. This is the kind of information that would help you understand how it's going to work. And oh, look, there's an Adobe Flash exploit. Oh, look, it's using Google's DOS service. There's so many different aspects to this that now you can fine-tune defenses and make a planned response, not just to fix this particular person's machine, but this may be a proactive warning that you haven't had the problem, but hey, we might want to go make sure we turn on feature X, Y, or Z in product A, B, and C. So this is all freely available, and you'll be getting information linked to that. Like I said, several reports a month, or depending on the busy week. These are the high-level ones with details you can make actionable. So cram that in there. I think we stayed on time there, Bob. How are we doing?
Yeah, outstanding. This is such a great resource, folks, that Infoblox is providing for you for free. So you'll get access to this in our follow-up email, so watch for that. I wanted to just mention to you as well, if you wanted to try the on-prem version of reporting analytics, we give you free 500 megabytes of indexing per day. It's not a huge amount, but it certainly lets you get in and try the solution. And you can certainly do that by going to infoblox.com to request the reporting and analytics free tier. Again, that is free. There are indexing options that meet your needs, but initially take a look. It's pretty powerful stuff, as you've seen already. We wanted to also just kind of summarize for you, why would you look at Infoblox for visibility across on-prem and hybrid multi-cloud networks? This is really important, right? So part of this, of course, you've seen some of the rich network data that's been presented today. It gives you the ability to monitor and see what's going on, to secure your network, to see your devices, to see your applications and how they're performing. You can get, as Bob mentioned, the attack details by category, by member, by rule, by severity, by time. I mean, great information, visibility into the source of attacks so that you can block and scope and triage those, and of course, early identification so that you can isolate and take corrective action. Bob, any other thoughts on this one?
No, just, the idea is that these are nice visual reports. They are the ones that you would use first stage, decide what you want to dig into next, or maybe there's nothing to dig into. So we've tried to show everybody kind of the high level going down to the low level, and we can take you through that entire journey.
Exactly right. Well, what are some next steps? One of the things we wanted to just mention to you, there's lots of resources on reporting and visibility on-prem out on infoblox.com. I'm not going to go through all of these for you right now, but we will be sending you some content. There are videos. There's also the Infoblox community and reporting forum that you can actually participate in. And it's a great place to get peer information, or if you're trying to solve a particular problem, we have SEs, systems engineers like Art that are on looking at that information on a regular basis to help. And then Bob, also in the cloud, right? There's lots of cloud resources.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
So we'll be sending you some of this content as well. And then of course, we're glad to talk about your network and security visibility needs. Adam, you reached out to us to speak with an expert on your upcoming project. So we're glad to follow up with you on that. Probably the best approach would be to contact your account team. We have our number here that's shown, and then of course you can reach out info@infoblox.com, and that's really helpful. And Art, thank you for working behind the scenes to answer a number of the questions. Are there any others remaining that haven't been answered? I see two. Does Infoblox store customer data in the record, and who's responsible for securing customer or user data?
So let me answer that one live. We have a data privacy group who answers all of these data requests about our product, so we can get you specific information. Typically, the data that we store in our discovery would be IP address, and there are some instances where we take IP address, username, and potentially a cellular IMEI. So depending on your compliance issues like GDPR or the Californian set, we can truncate that data and not have that available. So depending on your security posture and your data security needs, we can do that. But obviously, IP address is one of our key values in our database. So if it's a combination of IP address and other sensitive data, that's something that we can address.
Very good. Well, I think all of the other questions have been answered, so thank you very much. And we are out of time. We will be sending you a frequently asked question update, including all of the questions on the call today, so watch for that, as well as the link as we described and some of the additional assets. So we want to thank you, everyone, for joining the call today. And to Bob Hansmann, thank you for doing a great job, and then Art as well, great demo, and for answering all the questions. We will actually be back next week, next Tuesday, with a COVID-19 remote workers and securing that environment webinar. That'll be at the same time as this one with our partner PCN, and we would invite you to join that. You can also see other webinars that are being offered by Infoblox on the infoblox.com site. And so for everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. This concludes our presentation. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.